Richard, thanks for talking with me today. We're going to talk about disaster recovery plans and what comes into them and what is necessary. So, what, in your opinion and experience, why do I need this thing? What is it?
Well, thanks for having me on, Ron, and spending time to do this together with the two of us. Hopefully, this will be a long adventure, lots of conversations. Except for the latter part, which is you should be doing it, maybe by law. It's common sense, right? You have a disaster plan probably for your house. Hey, maybe people you don't know where your water shut off is. Maybe you don't have a fire extinguisher. Maybe you're listening to this and suddenly realize maybe I should be making some plans for my house. But really it's, what do I do when something goes wrong? How is it documented? And most importantly, how do I train my staff if I'm not around? If you've got an organizational chart that's, a couple layers deep, you're going to need to have some conversations with them about what a disaster recovery plan is, an incident response, business continuity of operations, all of those things, because you might not be the one driving the boat when the emergency happens.
Or you might be the emergency, right? Because they're like, hey,
Yeah.
call my IT guy. But wait, what if he's not available, right? I find that is, thoughts and prayers kind of a disaster plan with a lot of people. They're just like, oh, I thought you were our disaster plan. I'm like, no, 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 no. I can't help if your building burns down. I can help if you have a cyber incident. So we need to talk about what these are. A lot of small business owners, I think, just kind of assume it's like a black box. I got a guy, and so I got it covered, which is kind of only not really a plan. It's a hope, right?
Exact. I literally, it was a month ago. A doctor comes into my office and he's carrying his server like it's a little child. Like my server, my data. And I'm like, okay, like what's the deal? He had nothing. He had no plan. Didn't know what was going. Thankfully, he had some kind of cloud backup, but there was some limitations on that. We actually didn't even need it, but none of his stuff worked, and he caused the problem himself. But nonetheless, it was, well, where's your plan? How do we enact some of this stuff? And the doctor's like, I don't have a plan. The plan was to call around to find someone to help me.
Right, right. And that's another thing is how can he keep running his business? Like his stuff's down. It's a moving part. It does gonna break at some point. So we need to think about when my stuff breaks, what do I do next? The continuity of operations is important just to keep working. Well, there were some big hospitals in our area that got hit with ransomware, and you know what? They switched to paper. They were good to go. They had trained on it. The people knew what to do. They were annoyed, very annoyed. But somebody in ICU didn't suffer because of it, right? They were like, okay, screen doesn't work. Fine. Here, I'm going to go back to pad and paper, and we keep our logs and we do our things and we can keep working. And I think even a small business deserves that level of, okay, the world's not over. I can keep operating my business. I can keep my customers happy, and this too shall pass, right?
All businesses ran 40 years ago, 50 years ago, 60 years ago without computers. Some of even without phones. We won't talk about fax machines. And having a plan that is that, right? If you're an optometrist, if you're an orthodontist, if you're a dentist, most of the work you can document, write down on a piece of paper, and then go back to your systems when you need to go back to your systems. You can make those things happen. It's possible. Is it convenient? No, you got your nice EMR and everything's there, and you can't access it, and you can't, or your router went down. Like, it's not just about the computer. And interestingly enough, just like you said, with cars or other parts, I'm sure you hear it all the time. Well, it worked fine yesterday. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And your car started yesterday, and your washer started yesterday, and your light bulb worked yesterday. Things break, and you need to plan on that breakage somewhere down the road. And when the really, really critical, important thing breaks, do you have a backup of it? Becomes really, really important to have that conversation. And it's not just data that you might have a backup of it. Your data might be fine. It's the power supply, or it's the router, or the firewall, or the switch, or the access point. It can be a long list of things. That's the chain the link in the chain that broke.
Right. And kind of not all things are created equal, right? If my printer breaks, it's a different level of magnitude than if my server dies or I can't get to the internet. So having a plan doesn't mean we got to think of everything, but I think we kind of need to focus on what's important.
Yep. Sitting down with somebody and saying, could you not run your business without for 24 hours. And just starting a list, start writing it down. And it'll eventually turn into something. Nowadays, you can just throw it into ChatGPT or some AI program after you make the list. And as a matter of fact, even you can even ask them, what should I do? But you really want to have a subject matter expert say, all right, yeah, this is 50% of what you actually need. ChatGPT doesn't understand your environment. It doesn't understand your network infrastructure. It doesn't understand a lot of other things. It's going to give you some good advice, but you need to have a team of people who know what they're doing to take action on that advice.
Right. And that's where having a CISO accessible to you is really helpful, because they can be like, oh, okay, no, wait, we can boil this down. It's this, and this. They know your environment. There's just a couple, three things that are the linchpin to all the other things, right? And that's where, it becomes critical to have some experience doing these, because they're not hard. They're a little time consuming, but they're not hard at all. But you got to have some inkling of how the mechanics of your business work. Usually, a CISO or a high level person like that has a much better feel than just the IT guy. The guy who answers the help desk or supports your desktop computers is a great guy, but not what we need for the planning, right? You need a different level. And the cool thing is once you get these in place, and we'll talk about what is it, get it in place, but if you practice it, then it's super easy to recover. So that's the goal, is like, let's take the stress out of this whole situation. So with that in mind, talk to me about what the different components are. There's different words: disaster recovery, incident response, business continuity. Talk to me about what you've seen for these types of things.
Well, I usually like to talk about disaster recovery first, followed quickly by incident response, followed by business continuity, because they all kind of wrap into each other. When I'm writing, NIST documentation or whatever it is, each document will literally say, please see the other referring document, because, a hardware failure is an incident. So, all right, I got my server failed, my RAID card died, my hard drive died. I've got an incident. Is it a data incident? All right, refer to the disaster recovery plan. Do we still have functioning equipment? No, we don't have functioning equipment. Okay, now I need to refer to the business continuity part of the plan. What is the part that failed? And as you walk down that kind of like, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, you're following that decision tree to find out what you need to do. It's helpful to have documents that walk you through that decision tree to go through that. Disaster recovery is really critical. It's that disaster recovery planning is usually much more of an IT thing, whereas an incident response plan can be 50% IT, 50% something else, and then business continuity might be 20% IT, because the really, really critical pieces of your business might not be computers. Maybe you're a mold injection plastic plant, and not only 5% of your company is driven on IT and computers. If your mold injection fails, everything else is irrelevant. You're not making what you need to make, the widgets that you sell. So each one of those are really important to sit down with the business owner, or if you're a larger organization, the stakeholders of those organizational components, whether it's marketing or sales or production or manufacturing, and whoever those people are, to make sure that you get all of the pieces that should be in those plans so that they're actionable and actually make some sort of use when the event actually happens.
And fun fact, don't store these documents on the file server, because your file server might be the disaster. It's a silly little thing, but I cannot tell you how many times I've heard that story that I'm like, seriously, there should be a printed copy. The people who need to act on the thing, the piece of the plan, need to have their own copies, and they need to know where they are. And you know what? It comes to the other component of, once we got a plan, we got to practice the plan, simulate it. We call them tabletops, and it can be a fun exercise. Actually, it's not stressful. We're not taking down things, but we're talking through what would happen if sprinklers pop and your whole server room goes boom, right? Okay, now what are we gonna do? And see if it meets our business goals, because this really is all about running the business and making sure the business keeps doing what you do. If you're making injection molds, or you're making patient care, or whatever you're doing, we want to have IT support that, recovering for when, not if, something bad happens, well, it's no big deal. We can do it. We got this.
And a lot of companies now have some experience in dealing with that, right? COVID kind of popped open a can of spring-loaded worms for people to get an experience of what is disaster or an incident in this case. Really, that wasn't disaster recovery for COVID. It was incident response and business continuity. What do we do? Do our people have laptops? Can they work from home? Can they, like, what are the functions that we need? The incident is everybody's not coming into the office. The business continuity part is how do we make it so that they don't need to come in the office so that they can still keep doing their job? So some companies might already have a lackadaisical, one-page sheet written somewhere of, what to do for COVID, but they need to expand that for everything else.
Right. And sometimes the insurance company is going to ask. We're starting to see more and more of that. I don't know about if you are as well, but like, do you have a disaster recovery plan? What was the date that you last tested it? That's the zinger. Like, do you have a plan and did you actually test it? Because they know that if you tested it, all right, these guys, they got it going on. They understand the value of it, and therefore we're gonna minimize those premiums.
Whereas sorry, keep going.
No, whereas the guy who does not have that, he answers, no, I don't have a disaster plan. He's a high risk. So they're gonna, rate them up.
You've got every year in insurance, or whether it's business continuity or cybersecurity insurance, they're saying, hey, here's 13 checks that we want you to verify, or at least that you're attesting to that these are legitimate. And then I'm seeing pretty much every year they're adding another check. All right, now there's 14 checks. The next year there's 15 checks. The next year there's 16 checks, right? Well, we put MFA on our email, so we check the box for MFA. And the insurance company's like, no, we want to see MFA everywhere. You said you put MFA on everything. Oh, no, we meant our email. Well, that's how they got in through the firewall and the VPN, and now your cybersecurity insurance policy is void. So yeah, it's great to see really insurance companies. You're hoping they're going to be on the hook to cover you. Kind of say, hey, you have to have really these are really basic things for an organization to have, and very often they don't have anything close.
Right.
Partially because of it's partially on them and partially on us. We should be able to create documents that are good templates for all of our customers, and then we're just spending a smaller amount of time interacting with people, doing the actual consulting, sitting down and doing the time frame. We don't need to be doing 50-hour, 100-hour blocks of time. If the organization's big enough, we're going to need to. But if you're a 4-location doctor's office, you shouldn't be expecting to spend high 5 figures to get all this stuff done. There was a day that this stuff really cost a lot of money to do because of the man hours and how specialized the knowledge was. But now it's pretty cheap. There's almost no excuse, which is why the governments and the insurance companies are saying, hey, you have to do this.
Have it. Exactly. And NIST has published standards for the frameworks to do these things. Like, these are peer-reviewed structures, and those are free. Like, we just gotta guide you to go through and fill it out. And sometimes it's just a matter of us being the ones to push. Like, hey, come on. We gotta do this. Let's get this done so that we can make the insurance company happy. Regulators, like, there's compliance and contractual agreements you might have with your customers that say you have it. So you better have it. And this is any size business, quite frankly. It's not the giant guys anymore.
No. I mean, HIPAA. I'm in Austin, Texas, and here in Austin, Texas, we have House Bill 300, which actually treats every company as a HIPAA entity in some way, shape, or form. And when you really think about it, they are. They're holding PII and PHI of at least their employees, if not actual customers, being a HIPAA entity. So every company has sensitive data, and how are they protecting it? And really just being able to restore it and back it up and use it when they need to is, the basic bottom of the barrel. So an incident response plan should have, we had a breach, we got ransomware, we got X, we got Y, we got Z, right? The common top 10, top 20 events that somebody's going to have to deal with should be in that plan in some way, shape, or form.
Right. Along with all the contact information, so that some fire happens, ransomware happens, I pull out the incident response plan, and I'm like, okay, step 1, call your insurer. Step 2, call the president. Step 3, whatever. You have you don't have to think about it. Just do it, and it'll be smooth and quick.
It's critical the one thing that you mentioned about making sure that we're identifying what they need, what is their critical business component, can be so specific. So again, I'm in Austin, Texas. Austin, Texas is considered the bat capital of America. And there are bridges that I drive under frequently that on the side of the road, at the sidewalk, there are signs and at head height, do not handle fallen bats. Now, there is not a sign everywhere in America underneath every bridge that says do not handle fallen bats because it's not a critical component of the safety and the continuity of everything moving forward. Whereas here, because there's literally millions of bats that live in the bridges that then just die and fall, right? It's such a common event. We have to have signs. So that's kind of the same concept here is we have to look at all the common events and we have to write documentation and we have to educate the teams on whatever that is. And usually it's our frontline people. It's not, the lawyers or the doctors. It's the receptionists. It's the people that are going to see the emails first, somebody's going to double click on something and they're going to turn to their coworker and, hey, did you just see this thing happen? Right? Having all of that is really important and having those people trained on what to do when these events happen. Very, very, very important.
Yeah, for sure. I hear a lot of talk about RTO and RPO. So let's talk about those a little bit. When we talk about data, RTO and RPO should be common words in everyone's vernacular, but they're not. No. So what do you think for a small business? What is a reasonable recovery time objective or RTO for a little mom and pop shop?
Well, that's going to be on them. They're going to say, now everybody wants that to be as close to zero as possible. I don't want to have any downtime.
5 minutes.
Right? But it comes down to what are the factors that come into that equation. And those factors become how much data do you have and what is not just the size of the data, but the type of the data. You and I both know that copying 10 terabytes of a single database file is going to be way faster than 10 terabytes of pictures or Word documents. So the type of data matters, how much data they have matters, and where does that data need to live matters. If the data needs to live here, but I've only backed it up to the cloud, and I've got 10 terabytes of it, and I've got it all backed up and it's all nice and safe in the cloud, and I don't need to worry about it, but it needs to live on-prem for all of my software to work with it, then you might be down for weeks.
Right.
So having all of that, like sitting down with somebody and talking about what a reasonable RTO is very important because there's lots of technological pieces that are involved in the whole scope of that project.
Right. Internet speed is a surprisingly important factor that on day-to-day operations, your internet speed might be fine. But if I've got to do 10 terabytes and you want it down here in 5 minutes, it's going to be absurdly expensive to make that happen. It's not going to make sense. So we've got the push and pull between how long can I be down versus how much am I willing to pay to hit that RTO, right? We usually tell people that there's like a 10x factor of costs when you go from like 24 hours versus 5 minutes. Just expect it to be that big of a price difference. And you just got to decide, maybe it's not that important, or better yet, maybe we have one system that has a small RTO, but then another system that I can wait 2 weeks. Fine. I need one up in an hour and the other up in 2 weeks. Okay, that's something we can work on and try to figure out that balance for you. So yeah, that's absolutely great. Now let's talk about RPO, recovery point objective.
This is where things really, the type of business for your recovery point objective is usually the most important here. The recovery point objective for a dentist is going to be different than the recovery point objective for a CPA, because the dental work is not happening on the computer. There might be some clicks and there might be some other events that happen on the computer, but most of the work is happening in their mouth. And with a CPA or in any other industry that all of the work is done on an hourly basis and we're billing the customer in an hourly way, their RPO is they want that to be really tight. They want that to be very, very, very short. They're also going to be willing to pay for it a bit more because they're looking at this is how much money. If I go back, if I lose my server at 2 o'clock and I have to start back over at 10 o'clock, and I have 20 CPAs and bookkeepers, how many hours did I just fail to bill for? Because all of that work just got lost. I have to recreate that work in a technical digital fashion. So that can really change how the business wants to respond to oh, I lost a day's labor. No big deal. We do steel manufacturing. Maybe we lost an invoice or two. Maybe they're in the email. We can probably reconstruct most of the day's work. Most of it's out on the floor, the plastic mold injection company that I mentioned earlier. So it's what is the business is probably going to be the most important driver of the RPO, my opinion.
No, I agree with you. And then I also factor in their industry and any compliance or regulatory. There are certain requirements that might be a contract with your customer, or it might be a regulation which says that you have to retain data for a certain amount of time. And you got to think about that requirement when you're building out this plan, because it's not acceptable for me to tell the regulator that, oh, well, I had a blip, my server's down, I just lost that stuff, but I'm legally required to keep that stuff. So that requirement might force me to have a different RTO or RPO than I otherwise would have cared about.
Yes, the worst, my personal opinion on this is the worst culprits for RTO, RPO conversations are orthodontic clinics, right? An orthodontic clinic has a child as a customer and their mouth is changing and they're going to be seen over the course of years. So you're going to have an 8-year-old that's going to maybe be a patient till they're 16, 17. And then once they're no longer a patient, you still have to hold it for 7 more years. So you might be staring at terabytes and terabytes and terabytes of x-rays and dental photography and all of this. And you're like, man, I have to keep this for 20 years. And how am I going to properly segregate non-patients versus patients? And usually the answer of the practice is like, we're not even going to bother that. We're not going to separate them out year by year. We're not going to pull them out of the database, just back the whole thing up. And you're like, your servers are 22 terabytes. This is going to be rough. Okay. And they're just like, that's the cost in our business of doing that business.
That's right. And it has to be just baked in. This can't be an afterthought, because then you're like, oh, I can't, add this extra cost because I'm required to. Like, it just needs to be baked in, as you said. And I think it's really important to just be aware of those regulations. Like you said, Austin has very specific, regulations. Quebec has their own set of requirements. We have a couple clients up there. And, regionally, as well as by state and by federal, you'll have these. And more, we're hearing the bigger companies requiring their vendors, which could be our customer, to do something that they've never had to do before, because the big guy has decided, you know what, all these little vendors I have, they are my biggest risk.
Absolutely. I mean, it's been a decade or more now, I believe, since the Target hack. That was a HVAC subcontractor that came in that exposed them to that kind of situation. So you're absolutely right when it comes to, I've been running Titanium for 9 years now, and one of my very early clients came to me and they're like, hey, I hear that you can do compliance and you can do NIST. And I'm like, yes, I can. How can I help you? They're like, well, we just landed this contract with Toyota, and Toyota wants to make sure that we have all of these cybersecurity policies in play and all of these controls and all of this stuff. And it's 20 pages of our 120-page contract with Toyota, and I don't even know what these words mean. So you're absolutely right. Once the big boys who are ISO, they've got 35 different ISO standards that they meet. They go to hand you a contract, you better be able to jump and answer the questions that they're asking, because they're asking very serious questions, not an insurance policy, but it's their insurance policy that's making them make sure that all of their vendors are compliant with whatever that is.
Right. And for them, it's all about risk mitigation, right? They're trying to just keep things under control so that they don't experience a disaster of their own because of you. So yes, they're well ahead of us in the small business world in thinking through the scenarios where they've started getting down to all of the food chain, right, within their organization. And that's very important. And eventually all businesses need to get deeper and deeper into your functions, but honestly, if I could see every small business have maybe 3 or 4 scenarios that they've thought through really well, oh, I'd be a happy guy. Because most of them have 0 or maybe 1. And it's not hard. We just got to do it. Um, who do we bring in? Who do you typically bring in when we're starting to do these plans? Who's the connection that us as the security professional are going to typically bring to the table?
Depending on the size of the organization. I want operations myself. I want to go for the operations person. They know how the sauce is made. They know where the skeletons are buried, and they're going to say, "Oh, this actually is this, and this is this, and this is our really expensive piece of software that keeps the whole place going." They're going to be people that I bring to the table and say, "All right, list your infrastructure for me. List what if this device fails, it's doomsday for everyone." Those are usually people. If it's a smaller organization, I'm going to talk to the office manager. There's somebody who, and if you don't know who that person is, you go to the owner and you ask the question, if one person just walked out right now, who do you want to see that happen to the least? Like, who's the last person you want to see just walk out? And whoever they point out is probably the point of contact that you need to start asking questions to skeletons.
Right. Absolutely. If it's a bigger company, we like to involve HR because we want a protection of human life should be paramount in these plans. I mean, yeah, we're the cyber nerds and we love the cyber stuff, but disasters also come in all forms. A machine, a computer can cause a fire, which then we have a risk to humans. So the operations team, absolutely. The HR team is another one because, we need to know if they've got plans in place. And maybe they need to put some plans in place. How do I get everybody out of here if something bad happens? Remember the old server rooms where they would drop in the gases and nobody could breathe. So you got to get out of there or you're going to die.
The halon disbursement systems. Yeah. There's
right.
You've got once the fire kicks off and those halons start spraying, you got 90 seconds and I'd hold your breath while you're running out of the building,
right?
Or that room anyway. Yeah, absolutely.
I also like to involve at some point the person who holds the purse, the finance people, because they usually have a pretty good idea of what's important. Money in, money out. Right? What is going to be the big drivers? Because I find that, especially if they have a CFO or controller, they've got to have a really good idea. That's literally their job, right? To know. When we talk about business continuity, they're going to be the ones to say, no, this has to happen. We have to keep the trucks rolling. We have to keep doing deliveries. We had a customer whose plant they burnt to the ground. None of the trucks were there. So they were able to take their trucks and go to the old warehouse to pick up stock and keep doing deliveries, which was monumentally important to them continuing to do business. So finance is important. And like you said, the owner, it's always good. The owner, CEO, whoever's the big G's, right? Just talk to them about what's important to you, right? Because we need their buy-in to this whole thing because we're going to take their time, their energy, and we're going to be practicing these things. And so if you've got executive buy-in, you're usually going to be much more successful. And they don't have to do all the things. They just got to help tell us, please do the things.
You are absolutely right. Stakeholder involvement is critical regardless of the size of the operation. And data owner responsibility. Who is the actual data owner? And that answer might be no one here. There's no one in the organization. In the case of what I mentioned earlier, Toyota was the data owner. Right. So Toyota was making these are the hoops you're going to jump through. These are the requirements. So the person who might be answering some of those questions might not even be in the business. You might not get to talk to them, or you'll have to have somebody introduce you via an email and you'll get a Zoom call. So, and that falls into other kinds of compliance, whether it's CMMC or other safeguards that are SEC controls or some other kind of standard that you need to meet, because those are the requirements of the type of data that you have. So you might have an organization where no one in the organization owns the data, and yet they're responsible for a very long list of controls on that data. And there's both state and federal guidelines on that data. So you can get into a very long conversation on some of this stuff. And even the business owner might be like, man, I had no idea that I wasn't doing these things and these things are required.
Yeah, it's a good exercise too, because it does unearth some of those things. Like we start talking about systems and they're like, I don't know who's in charge of that. And that might be, our scheduling program. Oh, well, who's in charge of locking it down? Who's doing the backups? What happens if it goes down? Do I have to worry about disaster recovery if one of these systems are in the cloud?
Yeah, you might.
Oh.
That kind of we have a saying in our industry that for the non-technical that are watching, shadow IT, right? Is there an infrastructure that the organization is using that you haven't exposed to IT because of some reason? And that system fails, that database fails, that thing goes corrupt, and then they come to you and hey, can you fix this thing? And you're like, I didn't even know you had that thing. I haven't been backing that thing up. Hey, what do you mean you have a desktop in the corner that you didn't tell anybody about and it's hosting all your QuickBooks files? I thought all your QuickBooks files were on the server. No, we don't put QuickBooks files on the server. Yeah, I wasn't backing that box up. Nobody told me about that. So it can be a tragic conversation if you wait for the customer to define the scope of the engagement on some of the stuff.
Right. Well, let's talk about that. How do we start?
Oh boy. Usually I start with a couple shots of some really high proof liquor. No. Ultimately it comes down to how to start it for me. Comes with what compliances are we trying to meet, right? If we're just a widget company, then we don't need to worry about a lot of things typically, and we're not going to have a lot of compliance. We don't report to other people. But if we have an insurance plan, we have a cybersecurity insurance plan, or we have a requirement that's dictated to us by a federal government or a state government, we start there because we're required to include all those things. So why not just look at that list of things and say, for example, with HIPAA, it's really just good basic IT and good basic cybersecurity. There's nothing super advanced in that process as a requirement at all. So you just start with the basics, and that will usually give you a good core starting point. If not, then you go through the who's in charge and what critical devices and data systems do you have. But even if they're not a HIPAA entity, you can still go take like a HIPAA or a high trust or another playbook and another framework and apply it to the company.
Right. And why recreate the wheel, right? This is good hygiene. It's not ridiculous. Like CMM Seal is much more stringent than something like HIPAA. HIPAA really is pretty basic stuff, like table stakes. So why not start with something? And that's what we do too, is we look at the requirements from customers, from governments, from insurers, right? And contractual. And then we start looking at what systems they use. And like you were mentioning before, what kind of data, where is it, right? Because as I kind of alluded to, it's in the cloud, it's backed up. It's biggest fallacy ever. Like, it is not backed up because it's in the cloud. It might be redundant, it might be fault tolerant, but that does not mean backed up. It's not the same. So if they have an emergency, how are you going to get your stuff?
Yep. A RAID is not a backup. And that is really what the cloud is doing when it's copying from one server to another server or one time zone to another time zone, is just a cloud version of a RAID. And how do we make sure that all of those things are backed up and what you need? And that can become a really confusing process because you might not be able to control those things. You might not be able to back up the EMR that is the most important piece of the company because it's not an option. You can export all your data maybe, but you can't be part of the active backup of a lot of software as a service solutions. So we just got to focus on what we can control and what we can do. And if that's desktops and laptops, great. That's a real easy point of contact for us. That means the most important thing is making sure that they have good internet and that the internet is functioning. And then the most important thing is, a router and a firewall and a switch, maybe an access point. We're not going to care about systems nearly as much if everything's in the cloud and we don't have any control over where it's being backed up or what they are. But then they're usually SOC 1, SOC 2 levels of compliant. They have certain levels of organization, and you can usually ask them. Matter of fact, that's a great trick, is to go to your software vendors and say, how do you do these things? Can we have a copy of your documentation? And then you can just kind of copy and clone that.
Right? Absolutely. They should have it. It should be yeah, we got it. Here you go. Boom, like right away. Because any responsible company, if you're putting your most important stuff into the cloud, you need to make sure that they got their act together. And those compliances for the non-technical, like the SOC 2, that's a good sign. It means somebody else went in and they, assessed them against a bunch of different controls. And they said, yes, not only are you doing this, but you're doing this over a whole year. So good job. You've got your act together. So that if something bad happens, when something bad happens, they've got a plan, they can recover, and hopefully you won't even know. That's the beauty of the cloud, right? Is that it's fault tolerant, it's resilient. So when that cloud system loses a data center, it just magically moves you to another one and you keep working and it's all good. But that's not our disaster recovery plan. Our plan is that what if I can't get to it at all? Now I got to do something about it. And remember when we were talking about the 3 different plans, the disaster recovery, business continuity, and incident response, in the incident response plan, it may very well have the phone numbers and the account numbers and all of the contact info you need if that thing goes down in the cloud, so that you've got a plan. You can be on it right away and get your stuff back up. Even though you're not controlling the recovery, you are initiating a disaster, right? Very important.
We have a misunderstanding sometimes of these situations. If there's a scope of the incident, the scope of the disaster might remove your IT company. If it's a citywide power outage, your IT company can't help you with that, and your IT company is affected. So you
Right.
might be looking at a meantime to being back online of varying degrees because of the scope of the disaster. And those should be kept in mind as well. A long time ago, I was running a help desk for a large organization that was a marketing company. And this is when, oh man, this is little of 2002, 2003, 2004. There was like a squirrel or something in Buffalo, New York that like blew the entire eastern seaboard of New York State out. Everybody lost power, right? And we didn't know that yet. And I'm interacting with the head of marketing and I'm telling people, all right, everybody shut their machines down, right? You're all on UPSs. Everybody shut everything down, shut everything down. And the manager runs up to me and she's like, why are you telling people to shut things down? Like they need to be on calls. I'm like, listen, this whole building's lost power. The whole city's lost power. Everything's lost power. It doesn't matter what your contract is. Nobody's going to be able to make phone calls. We need, like, this is way bigger than just this building or just this floor. We need to look at a lot of other pieces that are happening here. It might be to the point where nobody even cares about making calls. People are going to run home and go take care of their families or kids, right? When we look at the roles and responsibilities of all of these plans and who's supposed to enact them, if the incident or the disaster is impactful to families and other pieces of your community, you might not be able to enact your plan for hours. All of those things need to be kept in mind, that it's not just might be your computer, it might be Amazon, it might be Microsoft, there might be a meteor coming down from the sky, right? You're just like, I don't know, I'm not going to worry about my backups today. Maybe for the aliens to come, unearth them in 10,000 years, maybe they'll stand my doctor clinic back up. So there's a lot of factors that can come into these documents. They can get pretty broad and deep when you really like sit down and think about all the things that you're trying to prepare for.
Yeah. What is the cadence that we should do? We got our plan. All right, I made a plan. I got 3 or 5 at least scenarios that I've planned for. And now what do? Stick them on a shelf? Obviously, don't leave them on my file server. I need to be able to get them. If the power goes out.
Well, they're living documents. They're not something that we're etching in stone and putting up on the wall and saying, all right, we're done. Right? Like, because you are going to adding new people, you're adding new services. The person who you want to handle the event might change. So you might need to modify those documents. So you want them on a file server, but you definitely need them printed out. And that's where you have version control, usually in the document that says, hey, this is the last time this plan was updated, as well as this last time this plan was tested. So we want to have some level of, all right, depending on the level of again, level of clearance or compliance you're trying to meet, whether it's every quarter, every 6 months, every year. Usually insurance says every year you've tested your backup. Can you restore data? We would do in some of the labs that I had at Lockheed, rotation was every month. We literally had software that was developed, and it would randomly pick a file from the backup and say, restore that file. And
Yep.
it was just an email every month, auto ticket creation, restore this file. All right, we restore the file, we verify that's the right file, off we go. And then once year we had to do a full tabletop test, and then once every 2 years we did a full like pretend fire drill. Of these 5 people, 2 of these 5 people have been removed. They're not available to the plan.
Right.
Therefore, you have to have your secondary person fall back to do X, Y, and Z. Like, because you're doing some military contracting, some of those concepts come into play as well.
Right. Absolutely. And the tabletops don't have to be scary. I think a lot of people are intimidated by the idea of sitting in a conference room. They feel like they're on the spot. Like, oh my God, everybody's going to know how stupid I am. No, no, no. What have your experience has been with the first time somebody does a tabletop?
Just like you kind of alluded to, I try to make sure that they understand that the goal here is to improve it, to intentionally find the flaws in it, and whether that there's a gap in documentation or we have some confusion in who's doing what and how they're doing it, what their scope is. The whole point is to just make it better and to test it, right? That's why we had fire drills in high schools as kids or in college, right? The fire drill is to train you of the event, what to do in the event of this happening. And you're doing the same thing with your employees. The tabletops are to help train as well as to discover what you might be missing. And during those tabletops, that's when they're going to bring up, oh, we didn't include that new X-ray scanner that we bought 2 months ago. Oh, okay, let's go update the documentation. So they're super helpful. I don't think I've ever had a tabletop exercise that didn't reveal something significant the first time we ran it.
Oh gosh, yes. The first time is usually the most. But even the second and third and fourth, like something comes up. Oh, Sally's not here anymore. Well, who's our backup now? Right? We need to think of these things as we go, and at least once a year you get that check-in. It's like doing inventory, right? You count, oh, oops, we're missing this one thing. Right, let's fix it. And that's all it is. It's just about fixing it, being ready, and remembering. Because if you take 2 or 3 years between a test, I don't know about you, man, but I can't remember what I had for lunch. You expected me to remember that from 3 years ago? No chance.
And I talk to my team about that all the time. I say, document everything, because the person you might be saving with that documentation might be you.
Right. Your future self will thank you.
Yes. Be kind to your future self.
Absolutely.
Don't be like, oh, past me, curse you. Like
curses.
So yes, absolutely. All of this documentation is for everybody when the event happens, because especially in our case, we've got hundreds of businesses that are relying on us for support to do these things for them and to use our experience to fill these gaps in from all of the experiences that we've had.
Right. Exactly. So to wrap up, it's a living document. Just start. That's the most important. Just start. It's not that bad. Have a professional help you, guide you, because we've got templates, we have structure. We can short circuit a lot of the questions that you might have in your head if you try to do this on your own. You absolutely can do it on your own. It's just a matter of how long will that take you, right? Let's cut that journey shorter.
It is an elephant that you are trying to eat, and it just one day at a time. You're just going to go through it. You're going to knock out what you can, and it's going to take a while, but it's just like what they say about trees, right? What's the best day to plant a tree? 10 years ago. What's the second best day? Right now.
Exactly. And all right. Well, that's great. Thank you, Richard. I appreciate all your insights here. This was fun. And if anybody needs a disaster recovery plan, reach out to us. We'll help you out.
Thank you very much again for having me, Ron. I look forward to the next one of these. We'll see how many 3-letter and 4-letter acronyms we can cram down people's throats.
Exactly. But hopefully somebody learned something. If you did, today was a good day for me.
Agreed. Thanks a lot, y'all. Have a great one.
Thank you.